Imagining it may be equally agreeable to you to know the circumstances of my life, many of which you are yet unacquainted with, I sit down to write them for you. Having emerged from the poverty and obscurity in which I was born and bred, to a state of affluence and some degree of reputation in the world, and having gone so far through life with considerable share of felicity — I actually had to look that word up, felicity means happiness — the conducing means I made use of, my posterity may like to know, as they may find some of them suitable to their own situations, and therefore fit to be imitated. Okay, so that's the beginning of the book that I want to talk to you about today, which is the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And the part I just read to you is actually a letter that he's writing to his son, William. At the time, Ben is in his 60s. And he's kind of explicitly stating the goal of his autobiography, which is in parallel the goal of this podcast. He's saying, hey, I've had a lot of fortunate experiences in my life. I've learned some things, and I'm going to tell you the things I learned so that if you like them, if you find them agreeable, you can actually imitate and adapt into your own life. So if this is your first time listening to Founders, welcome. My name is David. The concept behind this podcast is pretty straightforward. Every week I read a biography or an autobiography of an entrepreneur, and I just try to pull out ideas that we can all use in our life. So before we get into the rest of the book, it may seem a little strange that I picked Ben Franklin as a subject for a podcast on entrepreneurship, but he very much was an entrepreneur. So I always talk about this idea that I think it's very useful to collect ideas because you never know when you're going to use them. Case in point is I was several years ago, I was listening to or watching this podcast that used to exist. It's called Foundation. It was created by the founder of Dig, Kevin Rose. And on the podcast, he actually is interviewing Elon Musk. And he asks Elon the question, that you started companies really early, you were really young. How did you, did you read, how did you learn business? Did you read a lot of business books? And what Elon said, the answer to that question stuck in my mind for several years, and it influenced my decision to start this podcast. And he says, I didn't read very many general business books. I like biographies and autobiographies. I think those are helpful. Then he talked about, he said, I liked both Franklin's autobiography, which is the book we're covering today, and the biography by Isaacson. That's Walter Isaacson, the author. And then Elon elaborates what's useful about learning about Ben Franklin. He says he was an entrepreneur. He started from nothing. He was basically a runaway kid. He created this printing business. He also did science and politics. He's one of the people I most admire. So I knew it was only a matter of time till I would do a podcast on this book. I also did it a long time ago, before this podcast was just focused on entrepreneurs. I read Isaacson's book on Ben Franklin, did a podcast on it, but then I deleted it because I didn't know what direction to go in. So I may wind up rereading that and doing like a Benjamin Franklin part 2. But for the meanwhile, the autobiography is a perfectly good tool to use to get some ideas directly from the mind of Ben Franklin. So I'm just going to move through. Some of these are going to be stories. Some of it's just going to be quotes. This is just an aphorism on vanity. And he says, most people dislike vanity in others, whatever share they have of it themselves. But I give it a fair quarter whenever I meet with it, being persuaded that it is often productive of good to the possessor. So let me read that sentence again. He says, most people dislike vanity in others, whatever share they have of it themselves. So, people don't like you to take pride in your own accomplishments, even though we all do that ourselves. We just don't want, to display it outwardly. But I give it fair quarter whenever I meet with it, being persuaded that it is often productive of good to the possessor. So he has a little counterintuitive point. He's saying, I understand you don't like this, but I actually think it's beneficial for people to have pride in their accomplishments. So I found that thought interesting. So I'm just going to jump. Now I'm going to jump into Ben's early education, his first job, and then memories of his father. And so he says, my elder brothers were all put apprentices to different trades. I was put to the grammar school at 8 years of age, my father intending to devote me to the service of the church. My early readiness in learning to read, which must have been very early, as I do not remember when I could not read, and the opinion of all his friends that I should certainly make a good scholar, encouraged him in the purpose of this. Just a side note, Ben was the youngest child. His father had 17 kids. I had risen gradually from, so he's talking about one season of school, I had risen gradually from the middle of the class of that year to be the head of it. But my father altered his first intention, took me from grammar school, and sent me to a school for writing and arithmetic. He did that for a year, and then at 10 years old, I was taken home to assist my father in his business, which was that of a tallow chandler and a soap boiler. So I guess he makes soap and candles. And he says, accordingly, I was employed in cutting wick for the candles, filling the dipping mold, and the molds for the cast candles, attending the shop, and going out for errands, etc., etc. I disliked the trade. So before he continues on, the fact that he doesn't like the job he's doing and he needs to find a different one, he has some. This is how he's remembering his father. Many years after his father's passing. He says, I remember well him being frequently visited by leading people who consulted him for his opinion in affairs of the town or of the church he belonged to, and showed a good deal of respect for his judgment and advice. He was also much consulted by private persons about their affairs when any difficulty occurred, and frequently chosen as an arbitrator between contending parties. And at his table, he liked to have, as often as he could, some sensible friend or neighbor to converse with, and always took care to start some ingenious or useful topic for discourse, which might tend to improve the minds of his children. By this means, he turned our attention to what was good, just, and prudent in the conduct of life. So he likes to have interesting people, to have intelligent discussions, over at his house, and he wants his kids an audience so they can learn from these discussions. So this is kind of like a mini podcast, hundreds of years before they were invented. And so now we're going to learn how, what Elon was saying, like how did Ben get his start in the printing business? And it had to come through several years of dealing with being under the thumb of his brother, which he did not appreciate, which causes him to run away, which Elon was mentioning earlier. But he's still working for his father. He says, but my dislike to the trade continuing, my father was under apprehension that if he did not find one for me more agreeable, I should break away and get to sea. So Benjamin Franklin had threatened multiple times that he'd just jump on a boat. They're living in Boston at the time. He'd go down to the port and he'd go for a life of adventure. So he says, he therefore sometimes took me to walk with him and see joiners, bricklayers. Now this is just a list of occupations that were in their town. Joiners, bricklayers, turners, braziers, etc., at their work, that he might observe my inclination and endeavor to fix it on some trade or other on land. So that was his goal. He, one of his other sons, Josiah, had left to a life on the sea, and it really, he says it caused him great vexation, which just means it pissed him off. Okay, so it says, from a child I was fond of reading, and all the little money that came into my hands was ever laid out in books. Now keep in mind, Benjamin Franklin did not have much organized education. He's widely self-taught through just reading and talking to people. He said, my father's little library consisted chiefly of books in polemic divinity, most of which I read, and have since often regarded that, at a time when I had such a thirst for knowledge, more proper books had not fallen my way, since it was now resolved that it should not be a clergyman. Remember, what he's referencing there is his dad originally thought, hey, I'm going to have him, his occupation is going to be one of the church, and then he changed routes. He's like, why did I read all these books? At a young age, it's so much easier to read. I'm reading books on that I'm not going to use in my life, is basically what he's saying. He says, this bookish inclination at length determined my father to make me a printer. So he already had his older son, James, was in that profession. So in 1717, my brother James returned from England with a press and letters to set up his business in Boston. I liked it much better than that of my father, meaning the business. In a little time, I made great proficiency in the business and became a useful hand to my brother. I now had access to some better books. An acquaintance with the apprentices of booksellers enabled me sometimes to borrow a small one, which I was careful to return soon and clean. Often I sat up in my room reading the greatest part of the night, when the book was borrowed in the evening and had to be returned early in the morning, lest it should be missed or wanted. So he's basically saying he had such a desire to learn that he would forego sleep just because he only had a tiny window in which to read these books. So we're also going to see while he's working for James, he has entrepreneurial tendencies right from the get-go. And, he's very, very young. I don't even think he's a teenager at this point. And then he also talks about something that, and something I've also been noticing with a lot of the notes I've been taking for Founders Notes, is these entrepreneurs always talk about like there's some kind of like side thing that benefited them, had like a roundabout benefit later in life. So in one example, like this guy wanted to become an entrepreneur. He had a full-time day job, so he just blogged and started writing about all the stuff he was learning. And then eventually that opened up for him to start a conference, start other businesses, start podcasts, which then kind of just fed into this like virtuous cycle. So Ben Franklin's going to talk a little bit about that here with the power of writing, which basically fundamentally changed his life. It's probably why he's so well known. It's based on his writing. So first, the entrepreneurial tendencies. He says when they were, he started like writing just like little stories and stuff. He called it wretched stuff, just like street ballad style stories. But since his brother was a printer, and he worked at a printing company, he started printing them. He said when they were printed, he sent me about the town to sell them. The first sold wonderfully, the event being recent, having made great noise. This flattered my vanity. So this again goes back to that whole point on vanity where he had a really early initial success selling his books, and that made him more confident to go off and do other things. So that's what I think he was mentioning with that quote earlier, that aphorism of vanity. It's like, don't indulge yourself, but understand that you're capable of learning new things. And then when you have a success like this, like let it reinforce you to try to do other things, which I think is a good idea. So he says, writing has been of great use to me in the course of my life and was a principal means of my advancement. So at this point, Benjamin Franklin is not only known for writing under his own name, but he wrote under several different pseudonyms. And so this is the very beginning of this. And so he says, my brother had begun to print a newspaper. It was the second that appeared in America. I remember him being dissuaded by, this is actually really funny. We always talk about how critics, like anytime you're going to create something new, expect to be criticized, expect that people are resistant to change and they don't really know what they're talking about. So, that doesn't mean like you can't get good constructive criticism, but just understand that some criticism is unfounded. It's people aren't really looking deeply into things before they comment on it. They're just, babbling away. So his brother runs into this in 1720 where he has this idea. I'm going to start a newspaper. There's already one. Why isn't there a second one? And listen to how ridiculous now this criticism is going to be with our benefit of hindsight. I remember him being dissuaded by some of his friends from the undertaking as not likely to succeed. And the reason why it won't succeed? One newspaper being, in their judgment, enough for America. So anyways, he continues on. He doesn't let this criticism bother him. He starts the newspaper. And Benjamin Franklin says, I was employed to carry the papers through the streets to the customers. So another one of his first jobs is newspaper delivery boy. So some people would write little pieces for the paper. They'd put it under the door of the printer and they would read it. And if they thought it was good enough, they'd print it in the newspaper. And a lot of them were written under like fake names. So Ben's like, hey, well, I want to write. Like my brother's not going to take it seriously. If his little brother has these ideas, let me operate under a pseudonym. So he says, I was excited to try my hand among them, but still being a boy and suspecting that my brother would object to printing anything of mine in his paper if he knew it to be mine, I contrived to disguise my hand, and writing an anonymous paper, I put it in at night under the door of the printing house. It was found in the morning. And so the next morning, Ben's there when they all find this, and they're all reading and commenting on it. And he says they read it, commented on it in my hearing, which means he heard it, and I had the exquisite pleasure of finding it met with their approbation. And that, in their different guesses as the author, none were named but men of some character among us for learning and ingenuity. So while they're trying to guess who it was, they're just rattling off people that are well respected. So that gave him even more confidence. He's like, oh, that's nice. I'm kind of in peers with these people. So this doesn't last long though, because Ben and James, like James was kind of a jerk to him a little bit. Didn't like Ben got a lot of attention because of his like pretty obvious advanced intellect at such a young age, and there's all these things talked about in the book, but James looked at Ben like an indentured servant, and Ben wasn't the kind of person that wanted to be controlled by anybody. So he's like, I'm out of here. So I sold some of my books to raise a little money and was taken on board privately. He jumps on a ship to New York. In 3 days, I found myself in New York, nearly 300 miles from home, a boy of but 17, without the knowledge of any person in the place and with very little money in my pocket. So that's what Elon was talking about. He's like a runaway kid. He had to start from nothing. He had literally nothing. But having a trade and supposing myself a pretty good workman, I offered my services to the printer in the place. So he meets the printer. Printer's like, listen, I don't have any business for you, but I know of somebody in Philadelphia. And he says he could give me no employment, having little to do. But he says, my son at Philadelphia has lately lost his principal hand. The person working for him died. And if you go over there, I believe he may employ you. So Ben does just that. He's like, all right, well, I'm not going to stay in New York if there's no work for me. And this is his humble arrival in Philadelphia as he remembers it. He says, my first, and this is really interesting because, he's definitely accused of having some vanity of his own. But I would argue that it's probably deserved. So he says, my first entry into that city, that you may in your mind compare such unlikely beginnings with the figure I have since made there. I was dirty from my journey. My pockets were stuffed out with shirts and stockings, and I knew no soul nor where to look for lodging. I was fatigued with traveling, rowing, and want of rest. I was very hungry, and my whole stock of cash consisted of a Dutch dollar and about a shilling in copper. So he's just walking the streets trying to figure out what's going on in this town. And he says, I went up Market Street as far as 4th Street, passing by the door of Mr. Reed, and then a little twist of fate here. I passed by the door of Mr. Reed, my future wife's father, when she, his future wife, standing at the door, saw me and thought I made, as I certainly did, a most awkward and ridiculous appearance. So he actually meets the governor of the new area he's in. And, well, first of all, let me tell you, so there's 2 printers in Philadelphia, and he goes to see both of them. The first one that he was told to go is this guy named Bradford. So he says, these 2 printers I found poorly qualified for their business. Bradford had not been bred to it and was very illiterate. And Keimer, though something of a scholar, was a mere compositor, knowing nothing of press work. So this part's important because he's really identifying what he feels. He winds up going into business and competing directly with both these guys. And he's kind of telling you like his competitive analysis of why eventually he's going to compete with them and why he thinks he's going to win, which he does. So he talks about, this is something that's mentioned in the book multiple times, mentioned in many of the books that we've covered so far. And so during this time, he said he was gaining money by my industry, meaning hard work, and frugality. Okay, so now he goes to work for Keimer, and he's being industrious, he's being frugal, and, he's still dedicated to continuous learning. And so people hear about this young guy who's reading all the time. And so he actually meets the governor of the province, and he comes and calls on Ben. He wants to know who this new young man is. He says, he said I appeared a young man of promising parts, and therefore should be encouraged. The printers of Philadelphia were wretched ones, and if I would set up there, he made no doubt that I should succeed. So he puts this little kernel of an idea into Ben's mind, and he also gives him a promise. He proposed my setting up of my business, laid before me the probabilities of success, saying, hey, the printers here kind of suck. You could do better, and not only can you do better, but I will help set you up. So now this guy winds up being a liar. But Ben's doesn't really like hold it against him, even though what he does to Ben's kind of messed up. Where he just says, hey, he doesn't have much means, so since he can't provide means, he provides people hope, but it's false hope. So he says, hey, I'm gonna set you up. I'm going to like make sure you get the credit you need. And he says, why don't you go to England and pick out all the parts that you need to become a printer? And so he's like, I'm going to send you a letter of credit. And a few days before the journey, he's waiting on it. He's like, oh, no, I'm busy. I'll send it to you tomorrow. Then the morning comes and Ben's about to depart. He's like, oh, I'll send it on the ship. Never arrives. So in the meantime, though, there's just a good example of some great grandmother wisdom here. And this happens on the boat to England, and he befriends this elderly woman, a grandmother, being nice to her. And you remember, he's very young, 17, 18 years old at this time, doesn't know much of the world, is now traveling abroad, and there's two young women on the boat that are paying him attention, and he's like, oh, this is great, this is fantastic. But the grandmother pulls him aside and is like, listen, I need to school you on what's going on here, guy. He says, when she saw a daily growing familiarity between me and the two young women, which they appeared to encourage, she took me aside and said, young man, I am concerned for thee, as thou hast no friend with thee, and seems not to know much of the world, or of the snares youth is exposed to. Depend on it. Those are very bad women. I can see it in their actions. And if you are not on your guard, I'm translating from this old English, like I'm trying to translate in real time for you. But if you're not on your guard, they will draw you into some danger. They are strangers to you, and I advise you, in a friendly concern for your welfare, to have no acquaintance with them. And so this grandmother wound up being correct. They were trying to set him up to rob him. They did the same thing for the captain of the ship, and then once they got to England, they were actually caught basically seducing men and stealing their possessions is what they were doing. Okay, so skipping ahead a little bit, this is where he learns the dangers of vice, and he's just got a great quote. Okay, so he runs into his childhood friend Collins. And when they were growing up, they were two of the most studious young people in the little town they lived in, and they read a bunch of books. They would engage in intellectual debate or just kind of talking over whatever ideas and sharing ideas. But now he pops up later on in life, and it says, but during my absence, his name is Collins, he had acquired a habit of sodding with brandy, and I found by his own account, and from what I heard from others, that he had been drunk every day. He had gambled too and lost his money. Collins wished to be employed in some counting house, but whether they discovered his dramming by his breath, meaning the fact that he was drunk because it was on his breath, or by his behavior, he met with no success. He continued lodging and boarding at the same house with me and at my expense. So his friend is not only drunk, but he has no money, can't get a job because he continues to give into his vices, and is borrowing money liberally from Benjamin. And he says, promising repayment as soon as he should be in the business. So they wind up getting into a bit of an argument. They were drunk one day, or not. Ben wasn't drunk, but Collins was drunk. And they were with a group of other people on rowing a boat across the water. And for some reason, Collins decided that, hey, I don't have to row. You guys have to take care of me. And so this huge argument, because it's, just more crappy, selfish behavior. And Collins decides to take off for the West Indies. And before he leaves, he tells Ben, he left me then, promising to remit me the first money he should receive in order to discharge his debt. I never heard from him again. So again, kind of getting a crash course in human nature here. And then there's this great quote on the very next page, and it says, there was great difference in persons, and discretion did not always accompany years, nor was youth always without it. So the context of this discussion is that this governor wants to set him up in business, even though Ben's young. His father hears about it and doesn't want Ben to do it because he says, hey, Ben's too young to run a business. And the response was, well, yeah, there's a great difference in the quality of people, and it doesn't always get better with age. Okay, so this is what I was mentioning earlier, where he finds now he lands in England and he finds out the governor's unreliable. So he realizes, hey, there's no letters here. I don't know how I'm going to buy these things. I don't have any money. So he says, I began to doubt his sincerity. I found my friend Denham and opened up the whole affair to him. He let me into Keith's character, that's the governor's name, told me there was not the least probability that he had written any letters for me, that no one who knew him had the smallest dependence on him. And he laughed at the notion of the governor giving me a letter of credit, having, he said, no credit to give. So now Ben's worried. He's like, what should I do? And so his friend says, his advice is, he advised me to endeavor getting some employment in the way of my business, meaning the printing business, among the printers here. You will improve yourself, and when you return to America, you will set up to greater advantage. So he does exactly that. He gets a relatively low-paying job, he finds work, and he finds shelter. And the problem was, though, that he's used to, being frugal and squirreling away and saving money. But the cost of living in London at the time is so expensive, and his wages are not keeping up with it. And he says, our expenses, he has a friend that with him, because of our expenses, he was actually lending money to another friend. I was constantly kept unable to pay my passage. So the moral of the story is, the lower your costs, the more freedom you have. So it says, and then this is how he stumbled. The good thing, though, is he's not able to save much money during this time. He is gaining experience, but he's gaining a lot of knowledge because there's a library next door, or a bookseller next door, rather, that becomes his own personal library. So he said, I made an acquaintance with one Wilcox, a bookseller, whose shop was at the next door. And he said I might take, read, and return any of his books. This I esteemed a great advantage, and I made as much use of it as I could. So the reason I keep pulling these quotes out is because, we have a lot easier today. Like, we carry around the sum of human knowledge in our pockets. But Ben talked about one advantage that he had over just regular persons was his desire to constantly improve and to learn about, not only to develop more skills for himself, but to learn about the natural world. That's why he did experiments in science. He made all these different inventions, all of which he would refuse patent and copyrights on because he thought that you should share knowledge freely. But I just think it's important. Like, this guy obviously lived an amazing life, and if he's telling you over and over again that, hey, this was huge advantage to me, I think more of us should take heed. I think I talked about this this week, and I'll talk more about the end, how now I have a daily podcast, so and how to get access to that if you want. But I talked about it on my daily podcast this week. I think it was a tweet that says the internet is widening the gap between those that want to learn and those that want to be entertained. And what I took that to mean is, like, there's a near limitless supply to learn whatever you want to read about, whatever you want to listen to podcasts on, videos, lectures, etc. And so some of us are taking advantage of it, right? Most of the people listening to podcasts, obviously, like the one I'm doing, is obviously taking advantage of it. But the dark side, or the downside to that, is you could also just entertain yourself to death with just mindless entertainment. You just sit there watching crap all day, and you could do that forever. So you just have to be really, really careful not, what path do you want to choose? To me, I want to choose the path of people like Ben Franklin. Like, I want to know more 5 years from now than I know today, and 50 years from now than I know today, if I'm lucky enough to live that long. So, so this was, so he's working with a bunch of English guys at a printing press. It's like partially physical labor at the time. That's just how the technology worked. But I thought this little story was a really good look into how the mind of Ben Franklin worked. So he said, I took to working at the press, imagining I felt a want of the bodily exercise I'd been used to in America. So he wants that physical movement. I drank only water. The other workmen were great guzzlers of beer. They said they drank strong beer. So it says, my companion at the press drank every day a pint before breakfast, a pint at breakfast with his bread and cheese, a pint between breakfast and dinner, a pint at dinner, a pint in the afternoon about 6 o'clock, and another when he had done his day's work. So let me read this quote before I get into the rest of the story, so you keep this in mind. Because he has this great idea that, he picked up 300 years ago, however long it's been, that we're not really rational creatures. We're rationalizing creatures. So he says, so convenient a thing it is to be a reasonable creature, since it enables one to find or make a reason for everything one has a mind to do. So you're just really justifying your behavior. You're going to see that here with this drunk guy. So he says, I thought it was a detestable custom, but it was necessary, he supposed, to drink strong beer that he may be strong to labor. So he's telling Ben the reason he's doing this is because it makes me strong. What are you talking about? So he says, and this is the way Ben's mind works, though, which I find so interesting. I endeavored to convince him that the bodily strength afforded by beer could only be in proportion to the grain or flour of the barley dissolved in the water of which it was made, meaning he's breaking it down to its material constituents, right? That there was more flour in a pennyworth of bread, and therefore, if he would eat that with a pint of water, it would give him more strength than a quart of beer. And what do you think the result of that was? He drank on, however, and had 4 or 5 shillings to pay out of his wages every Saturday night for that muddling liquor, an expense I was free from. And thus, these poor devils keep themselves always under. All right, so now he has a new job. He gets recruited by this merchant. This guy was from England, went to Pennsylvania. He was basically broke when he arrived in Pennsylvania. He starts what today would be like a retail business. Like he buys things other people made, marks it up a little bit, and then sells it to the end customer, right? And he leaves England in kind of disgrace, not paying his debts. He makes all his money in Philadelphia. Now he's coming back to England. This is where Ben meets him. And he's coming back to pay all of his debts with interest. But he's only stopping there to grab some more stuff from England and go back to Philadelphia to his business. So he decides, hey, like, why don't you come work with me? Like, get out of this printing business, and I'll teach you how to be a merchant, or what we would call today, an entrepreneur. And so Ben comments on this. He says, he now told me he was about to return to Philadelphia and should carry over a great quantity of goods in order to open a store there. He proposed to take me over as his clerk to keep his books, in which he would instruct me, copy his letters, and attend the store. I now took leave of printing, and this is interesting how the future's never predictable, because listen to what Ben says here, as I thought forever. So he thought he was done with the world of printing forever. Keep in mind, obviously, that's not true. That's how he makes his fortune. And was daily employed in my new business, going about among the tradesmen to purchase various articles. And so now he's going around buying all these things with his new boss. And they're about to leave back to America, and Ben is just kind of reflecting on that. He says, thus I spent about 18 months in London. Most part of the time I worked hard at my new business and spent but little upon myself except in seeing plays and in books. But I had picked up some very ingenious acquaintance whose conversation was of great advantage to me, and I had read considerably. So he's talking about the guy that he hired. He's like, listen, I didn't make much progress. I worked a lot, only spent money on plays and books, but now I've actually made an acquaintance that's going to be very helpful to me. And it was. They get back to Philadelphia, and he says, I respected and loved him, and we might have gone on together very happy. But then this guy gets sick. And this happens only like a year after they get back to Philadelphia, a year or two after they get back. And it said, the sickness held on to him for a long time and at length carried him off, meaning killed him. The store was then taken into the care of his executors of his will, and my employment under him ended. So now he's got to figure out what is going on. Like, what am I going to do? Now I'm back in Philadelphia, and he's like, maybe I should just go back to Boston. So before he thinks about going back to Boston, he goes back to work for one of the printers, Keimer. They get in an argument, so Ben leaves, but then they wind up reconciling. But in between this, there's a guy named Meredith that's working with them. And Meredith is actually helpful of getting Ben to stay in Philadelphia. So he says, he dissuaded me from returning to my native country. It's funny that they call it country. He's talking about the city of Boston, which I began to think of. He reminded me that Keimer was in debt for all he possessed, that his creditors began to be uneasy, and that he kept his shop miserably. He sold often without profit for ready money, and often trusted without keeping accounts, that he must therefore fail, which would make a vacancy I might profit of. Okay. So it says, hey, this is these facts to be true. Keimer doesn't know what he's doing. My father would give us like the seed capital we need to start a printing company. And if we become partners, so Ben and Meredith become partners. He says, the proposal was agreeable, and I consented. His father was in town and approved of it. He saw that I had great influence with his son, so he wanted his son to be around Ben because Ben, avoided vices, and his son was another drunk. So he says, I gave an inventory to the father, who carried it to a merchant, and the things were sent for. The secret was to be kept until they arrive. So they keep working at Keimer's, but they're not going to tell them they're going to compete with them until they actually have the equipment. And so during this time, there's a bunch of people. Keimer's also a little jealous of Ben because a lot of people come to the printing house and like call on Ben. And Ben has this idea. He's like, well, my mind, and I love the way he puts this. When my daughter sees me reading, I'm going to start saying this. My mind having been much more improved by reading than Keimer's, I suppose it was for that reason my conversations seemed to be more valued. So he talked in the context that he's getting invited to these dinners or these taverns where people want to talk to him. So next time somebody sees you reading, say, what are you doing? Like, I'm improving my mind. And so one of these guys, he's basically, Ben's becoming acquainted with all like the older, like more successful people in Philadelphia. And one of them tells him, and he doesn't know that he's going to set up his own printing company. So it's kind of like prophetic, but he says, I foresee that you will soon work this man out of business and make a fortune in it in Philadelphia. So Keimer was not very respected. Okay. I have a note. This is confused. Sometimes I leave notes for myself. I don't know what I'm talking about. So I left a note, croakers everywhere. And now I have to read over all my highlights because I have no idea what I'm talking about. So let me jump into this. So he's already opened. He's already open for business at this time. So he says, we had scarce opened our letters and put our press in order before an acquaintance of mine brought a countryman to us, whom he had met in the street inquiring for a printer. So this random guy was walking around, said, I need a printer. Ben's friend's like, hey, I'll walk you over there. This country, and this is a really interesting point, or I guess feeling, I would say. This countryman's 5 shillings, being our first fruits, meaning the first revenue into the company, and coming so seasonably, meaning when they needed it, gave me more pleasure than any crown I have since earned. So Ben is a very, very, very wealthy person at the time he's writing this, and he's saying that all the money I've stacked does not give me this much pleasure as the first bit of money I made when I first started my company. Bless him. I have since earned, and so any crown that I've since earned, and the gratitude I felt toward his acquaintance that brought him his first business has made me often more ready than perhaps I should otherwise have been to assist young beginners. So that's Ben Franklin saying something we talk about a lot, that if you want to vote with your dollars, and you have the opportunity to spend with a company that's run by a person, the founder, as opposed to this giant faceless conglomerate, like try to spend money with the individuals because those are the people that need your help, not these giant companies that are, usually far away from their actual customers' well-beings. And he's saying that, I've otherwise been able to assist young beginners. We need more small businesses. We need more entrepreneurship, not less. The wages, speaking for my own country, the wages in this country for the middle class have been stagnant for 40 years. Nobody is coming to save you. Politicians don't care about you. There's nothing they can do. The only thing, you can only save yourself, and that opportunity is through, creating a product and selling that product to other people, and then repeating it over and over again. So, in any ways, I just think what Ben's saying here is extremely important. And any chance you can, support the people that are actually creating stuff that you like. All right, so there are croakers in every country. Oh, okay, now this okay, this makes sense now. So a croaker is just like a critic, like a jerk, like a pessimist. So he's going to tell us a story about one. So my note, croakers everywhere, is now making sense to me. There are croakers in every country, always boding its ruin. Such one then lived in Philadelphia, a person of note, an elderly man, with a wise look and a very grave manner of speaking. This gentleman, a stranger to me, stopped one day at my door and asked me if I was the young man who had lately opened a new printing house. Being answered in the affirmative, he said he was sorry for me because it was an expensive undertaking and the expense would be lost, for Philadelphia was a sinking place. The people already half bankrupt are near being so, even though all appearances to the contrary. And this is what Ben makes the point. He's like, that's weird. Like, what's up with all these new buildings and the rising of rents then? So being to his certain knowledge false, for they were, in fact, among the things that would soon ruin us. So when Ben brings this up, he's like, no, that's fake, right? So he says, and he gave me such a detail of misfortunes now existing, or that were soon to exist, that he left me half melancholy. So it's another example of why you should avoid pessimistic people. They're just not fun to talk to. Had I known him before I engaged in this business, probably I never should have done it. This man continued to live in this decaying place and to declaim in the same strain, refusing for many years to buy a house there because all was going to destruction. So he doesn't want to buy anything because why would I buy into a place that's going bankrupt? And at last, I had the pleasure of seeing him give 5 times as much for one house as he might have bought it for when he first began his croaking. Okay, so now he's going to talk about how he believes that industry is virtuous. And then we're going to get into knowing the right way to do something by seeing it done the wrong way. So there's people in town that are of the general opinion. It says general opinion was that it must fail, meaning his business, because there's already 2 printers in the place. And then, but there's this guy, Dr. Baird, who knew Ben, and he gives a contrary opinion. And this is Dr. Baird's words. He says, so he gives him a contrary opinion. For the industry of that Franklin, says he, is superior to anything I ever saw of the kind. I see him still at work when I go home from the club, and he is at work again before his neighbors are out of bed. I mention this industry the more particularly and the more freely, this is Ben talking again, though it seems to be talking in my own praise. So he's saying, listen, I'm telling you about my industry not just because I'm like self-aggrandizing, but because those of my posterity, meaning my descendants, who shall read it, may know the use of that virtue, meaning industry is virtuous, when they see its effects in my favor throughout this relation, when they see that what industry brought to my life. I soon intended to begin a newspaper. My hopes of success were founded on this, that the only newspaper printed by Bradford at the time was a paltry thing, wretchedly managed, no way entertaining, and yet was profitable to him. I therefore thought a good paper would scarcely fail. So he sees this guy doesn't even know what he's doing. He's making a profit. Like why would we assume that if I make a better product, I can also make a profit? And then, so he says he starts in the newspaper and he goes out and he's trying to get subscribers, people to pay for the information that he's printing for them. So it says, our first papers made quite a different appearance from any before in the province. It had a better type, it was better printed, and some spirited remarks and it had spirited remarks of my writing. So he's writing on the dispute that's taking place between some people in the local government, a governor and an assemblyman. So while this dispute's going on, Ben is writing in his own newspaper, and he's giving like pithy opinions. He calls them spirited remarks. But what happened was that people were like, it wasn't bland, so people were drawn to it. So he said, occasioned the paper and the manager of it to be much talked of, meaning himself, and in a few weeks brought them all to be our subscribers. So this like the way he is with his skill with the pen is bringing him more subscribers. But basically, he's telling us that he would have been great on Twitter. And it says, seeing now, and he's talking about these subscribers, seeing a newspaper now in the hands of one who could also handle a pen, which is very different from Bradford. So he get another example of what Bradford's messing up on. Bradford was printing out like this public information for like the address and the contact information for the politicians, but he messed it up. He said he had printed an address of the house to the governor in a coarse, blundering manner. We reprinted it elegantly and correctly, and then sent it to every member, meaning every member of the government. They were sensible of the difference, and then that actually led them to changing. When they needed something printed professionally, they took the business from Bradford and gave it to Ben. But So he's doing well. His printing company is doing well. His newspaper is doing well, but he's almost ruined by debt. And debt is something he talks about at length. I think he mentions it like 10 to 15 times in this book. And this book is rather short. It's 110 pages, the paperback version. So he's mentioning it every 10 or 11 pages. So he says, but now another difficulty came upon me, which I had never the least reason to expect. Mr. Meredith's father, which is his business partner, dad who put up the money, who was to have paid for our printing house, according to the expectations given me, according to what I thought, was able to advance only 100 pounds currency, which had been paid, but 100 more was due to the merchant, who grew impatient and sued us. We gave bail, but saw that if the money could not be raised at the time, the suit must come soon to a judgment and execution. And the execution of that judgment means that it would have ruined us, as the press and letters would have been sold for payment, perhaps at half the price. So he has two kind friends who agree to lend him the money to get him out from this happening. And then Meredith realizes, hey, I'm kind of like useless. I'm not good at this skill. I want to go back into the country and become a farmer. So Ben reincorporates, and he's now the sole proprietor of his business and therefore in control. And then a story on the page, a few pages later, just kind of tells me that Ben understood branding, what we would call branding today. And so he says, in order to secure my credit and character as a tradesman, I took care not only to be really industrious and frugal, those are the words again, but to avoid all appearances to the contrary. I dressed plainly. I was seen at no places of idle diversion. I would to show that I was not above my business, I sometimes brought home the paper I purchased at the stores through the streets on a wheelbarrow. So he's buying them at the store, but then he's pushing them through the street on a wheelbarrow to make it look like he's out delivering papers. Thus being esteemed as an industrious, thriving young man, and paying duly for what I brought, the merchants who imported stationery solicited my custom, meaning they saw him doing this, and this branding gave him more business. So they solicited my custom, and they also proposed supplying me with books, and I went on swimmingly. In the meantime, Keimer's credit and business declining daily, he was at last forced to sell his printing house to satisfy his creditors. He went to Barbados and there lived some years in very poor circumstances. So now there was three, now there's two. The person that Ben used to work for, and they had correctly predicted that, hey, this he's so bad at running business, so it's a matter of time till he fails, so it's going to open opportunity for us. They wound up being correct on that. Oh, and this was actually really fascinating. So he's got a ton of achievements, right? More than we could even list here. But one of the things that he did, which I didn't know, is he created America's first subscription library. So he says, I used to establish the Philadelphia Public Library, which from a small beginning has now grown to become considerable. At the time I established myself in Pennsylvania, there was not a good bookseller shop in any of the colonies to the southward of Boston. Those who loved reading were obliged to send for their books from England. I proposed that we should all bring us that we should all. So first of all, let me back up, because he has this thing, and I love this idea, and it's called the Junto, and it starts off as a small club of different tradesmen from all different backgrounds, blacksmiths, printers, writers, all kinds of people. And he organizes it, even though he's like the youngest one. He's like the leader of it. It starts off with like a dozen people, and then, grows to a lot more than that, to like different clubs all over the country. But basically they just meet. They all read books. They all have different ideas. They're all trying to continue to learn. And so they meet, and then they discuss like the business of the day. So not only are they giving them tips to like how they're running their businesses, like, because they're all merchants, but like they talk about philosophy and science and literature and all this other these different things. It's also a great product name. I kind of wish I called Founders Notes Junto if I had known this before. But so anyways, he already has this going, and he's like, I proposed to them, meaning the people in Junto, that we should all bring our books to one room where they would not only be ready to consult in our conferences, meaning these conversations, and it's fascinating. Like you can go online and see like the list of questions. So before they would talk, they would like have questions that would like basically be meant to spur in the discussion. So he says, let's bring all of our books in this year into one room where we have these conferences. So not only can we consult them in conferences, but they could become a common benefit, each of us being at liberty to borrow such as he'd wish to read at home. So finding the advantage of this little collection, I propose to render the benefit from books more common, meaning making it more accessible to everybody. If this is benefiting us, why won't it, like there's no way there's only 12 people that would be benefiting from this. By commencing a public subscription library. So few the readers at the time in Philadelphia, and the majority of us so poor, that I was not able, without great industry, to find more than 50 persons, mostly young tradesmen, willing to pay down for the purpose 40 shillings each and then 10 shillings each year. So 40 shillings to get started, 10 shillings each year, and we can all have access to this information. But, we always talk about all big things start small. And it's an example of that. On this little fund, we began. The books were imported. The library was open one day in the week for lending to the subscribers. And then they had promissory notes to pay double the value if the book wasn't returned. The institution soon manifested its utility, was imitated by other towns and in other provinces. The libraries were augmented by donations, reading became fashionable, and our people, having no public amusements to divert their attention from study, became better acquainted with books, and in a few years were observed by strangers to be better instructed and more intelligent than people of the same rank generally are in other countries. I thought that was one, surprising, and two, really, really cool. And so it says, this library afforded me the means of improvement by constant study, for which I set apart an hour or two each day, and thus repaired in some degree the loss of the learned education my father once intended for me. Reading was the only amusement I would allow myself. I spent no time in taverns, games, or frolics of any kind, and my industry and my business continued as indefatigable as it was necessary. My circumstances, however, grew daily easier, my original habits of frugality continuing. So when I read that part about, hey, like I just devoted myself to business because I enjoyed it, and then I spent my other time reading. First, that sounds like a good idea, right? Especially if you enjoy it, because then it's actually gonna be fun. What some people might feel laborious is like fun for you. But this whole thing is like, I did this for a long time, but my circumstances, however, grew daily easier. My original habits of frugality continuing. This reminds me of a few weeks ago, we talked about John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, and he has this great quote. And I did realize like what he's talking about there. Why is Ben Franklin's life getting easier? The more every day that he's able to be responsible with his resources, which to me it's really just the definition of frugality, right? Just being responsible. Why is it easier in life as opposed to being harder? And it's because just like he's avoiding. I'm going to use John Bogle's quote here to illustrate this. This is what frugality avoids. Keep your expenses low, for the tyranny of compounding costs can devastate the miracle of compounding returns. Ben Franklin is keeping his compounding cost low so he can enjoy the upside of compounding returns. And so a little while longer, this biography was written over, I think, like a decade and a half. I don't have the actual years in front of me, but he wrote it. He sat down to write it 4 different times, and so it jumps around a little bit. But and I think the last time it's actually unfinished because the last sentence is even finished, and he dies like a year or 2 after that. So he never actually completed it. But the reason I bring that up is because after he's already successful in business and he's kind of venturing out to different things, he has this idea that he wants to be, he's composing a list of virtues. So I just want to go through this list real quick. So he says, it was about this time that I conceived the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. So he winds up not, obviously, you can't achieve perfection, but he's very satisfied. Well, I'm jumping ahead. Let me just read you the list of 13 virtues that he tracked. He actually had like what would be like a rudimentary spreadsheet that he wrote out and he would write, what days he adhered to these virtues and what days he didn't. So the names of these virtues with their precepts were, and so he just lists them and he describes them. Number 1, temperance. Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. 2, silence. Speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. 3, order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Number 4, resolution. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. So I guess do what you say you're going to do. Number 5, frugality. Make no expense but to do good to others or yourself. Waste nothing. Number 6, industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. I wonder what he would think about social media and the modern distraction we all carry around with us. 7, sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly, and if you speak accordingly. Number 8, justice. Wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits of your duty. Number 9, moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Number 10, cleanliness. Tolerate no uncleanliness in the body, clothes, or habitation. Number 11, tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. Number 12, chastity. Rarely use venery but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or for the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. And number 13, humility. Imitate Jesus and Socrates. And so he's reflecting now here on, he did this for a long time. He talks about as he got older, sometimes he would track it every day. Sometimes he'd go from every day to every week to every month. But he says eventually he just stopped doing it. He says, I never arrived at the perfection I had been so ambitious of obtaining, but fell far short of it. Yet I was, by the endeavor, a better and happier man than I otherwise should have been if I had not attempted it. So when I read that, he's saying, okay, I wanted perfection and realized I couldn't achieve it, but even though I didn't hit my goal, I still felt better and happier that I did it. One of my favorite words of all time is this word called autotelic. And autotelic is just something that has an end or purpose in and of itself. So he was doing this activity for the sake of doing it. Even if you say you have another goal, like you just enjoyed it so much that you just do it because you want to do it. So I just love that. So now he's just going to close out a little bit reflecting on what it's like to be 79 years old. And he says, it may be well my posterity should be informed that to this little artifice their ancestor owed the constant felicity of his life down to its 79th year in which it was written. So saying, I'm telling you, like, the ideas that led me to have a very, very happy and blessed life all the way up until my 79th year, which is how old I am when I'm writing this. What reverses may attend the remainder is in the hand of the providence, meaning what happens in the rest of my life, I don't know, but it's up to God. But if they arrive, the reflection on past happiness enjoyed ought to help his bearing them with more resignation. And so now he's going to list the stuff that, like, what his ingredients for a happy life are. To temperance, he ascribes his long-continued health. To industry and frugality, the early easiness of his circumstances and acquisition of his fortune. With all that knowledge that enabled him to be a useful citizen and attain for him some degree of reputation among the learned. So going after knowledge, being an interesting person to talk to, that opened up so many different opportunities for him. And he's literally talking to his descendants right now. And that cheerfulness in conversation, which makes his company still sought for and agreeable even to his younger acquaintances. I hope, therefore, that some of my descendants may follow the example and reap the benefit. And again, that's closing out on exactly what we're trying to do here is, hey, I want to learn the ideas you had to have a good life. And like that last sentence says, if we're able to that like some of my descendants may follow the example and then reap the benefit of his experience. So if you want to read the full story, I'd recommend anybody reading this. I just think 112 pages of straight from the mind of Ben Franklin is actually probably a smart thing to read. I know the language sounds a little funny to us now, but it's really not, like it takes a little longer to read, certainly, but you can put together quite easily like what he means. So if you want to do that and support the podcast, if you go to founderspodcast.com and you click, there's like in the header, one of the things you can do is like click this, like it looks like the Amazon logo. I have like an Amazon page. You can also go directly to the URL. It's amazon.com/shop/founders podcast. So amazon.com/shop/founders podcast, or just go to founderspodcast.com and click the link. You'll see, not only we see this book, but you'll see all, I think up to 60 different books that I've done for the podcast so far, whatever that number is. And they're actually in reverse chronological order. So you can it's like a visual of all the books that I've done for the podcast. But anyways, if you use that link and you buy something from there, Amazon sends me a small percentage of the sale. So it's a great way to support the podcast. The best way, however, to support the podcast, something I mentioned earlier, I should have mentioned at the beginning, I forgot, was that I now have a daily podcast. And this is something I stumbled upon by accident, because for a long time I've been taking notes, just like I take notes on books of entrepreneurs. I take notes of podcasts, and a lot of I've taken a lot of them, 175, maybe. I think I've taken notes on 175 different founders, something like that. But anyways, so Founders Notes before that was just one weekly email with all the notes. It's like the key ideas. So I take just like I take a book that may take a few hours to read and break it down into like the best ideas that I can cover on an hour or 2 long podcast. I take a podcast that may be an hour, 90 minutes long, and I break it down into something you can read in about 5 to 6 minutes, right? So I was doing that for a while, and the company I use to do subscriptions, to collect the payments, and then deliver the emails, and also the archive, which I think is extremely valuable. They added this thing where they wanted an audio feature, and at first I was like, why would you do that? And then I started testing it out. I'm like, oh my God. Like that means I can do just like I'm reading my notes and doing this podcast, right? So I'm reading my notes on this Ben Franklin book. That's what you just heard, the last hour or whatever, however long it was. Now every day. So the new thing I'm doing is every weekday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, you'll receive an email from me. Okay. That email will have notes on one specific founder, their best ideas, how they think about their business, how they started their business, how they look at the market, tools they use to run their business, different ideas they have, books they read that were helpful, anything that's useful that we want to know, right? And we want to know and share to a lot of people. But now what I'm doing is every day I'm recording these small little versions of Founders that are me literally going through my notes and adding other things that come to my mind, just like I do on this podcast. So I didn't change anything. The price is still the same. It's $10 a month or $100 a year. If you want to support this podcast, please subscribe to Founders Notes, because just like you saw, I do this entire podcast for free. I don't do any ads. I don't pay anything on paywalls. So I need your support to be able to dedicate all the time I'm doing this. And these podcasts take a long time. I don't think everybody talks about how much prep they do for a podcast. I don't think many people read an entire book before they even sit down to record. That's a hell of a lot of prep. So, and I'm doing that because I enjoy it, and 2, I think you learn a lot from it. So if you get value out of my work, if you're learning from what I'm doing and all my time, please go right now, go to founderspodcast.com, and you can click any single, it's on the link for Founders Notes is on every single podcast I've ever done, and it's included in the header. So it's very easy, and you don't even have to go to the website. You can go into your podcast player, and if you look at the show notes, I put the link at the bottom. So please do that. You'll get a new podcast from me Monday through Friday, and you have access to all my notes, plus all the archives, plus everything else. So I don't know, all the feedback I got this week, I did 6 this week, just to see if and not only that, you can listen to the podcast and people respond directly to that email that goes right to me, and a lot of people have done that, and the feedback has been like, this is a good idea. So you don't even have to. You can read it. You can read or listen to it. But the chances are, if you like my podcast, if you like what I'm doing here, it's exactly what I'm doing here, but for just a shorter version and every day. And I think it's, again, by you signing up, that allows me the freedom to make these podcasts and make them freely available to everybody all around the world. So please do support there. I think you'll like it. And if you can, please do the annual basis. The annual basis helps more. It's actually cheaper. It's like $8 a month if you $8.30 a month, something like that. If you can't do the annual basis, do the monthly basis. Either one that you want to do. Okay, so that will unlock daily podcasts for me and the entire archive. Let's see what else. Oh, can you do me a favor too? If you're on Twitter, can you follow the show it's at Founders Podcasts. You can also follow me at David Senra 1. My Twitter's linked on every page of the podcast website if you want to get it there. But at Founders Podcast, what I'm doing now is I'm just gonna be posting like what book I'm working on. So you'll see like a picture of the book, and then like as I go through the book, interesting ideas or quotes that I find from the book, just stuff like that, like kind of like a behind the scenes of this podcast. And if you like some of the stuff I'm posting, if you can retweet it into your network, that's a good way to support the podcast too, because it kind of spreads. Like it makes people aware that this podcast exists, which is extremely helpful. And finally, I have a private podcast feed for those people that are nice enough that leave reviews. So every single podcast you listen to, I bet, or close to it, the host will ask you to leave a review. I took that one step further. I'm saying, hey, if you'll leave a review, you take a screenshot of your review and you send it to me at foundersreviews@gmail.com. So founders, just like the podcast, foundersreviews@gmail.com. Yeah, email me the screenshot of a review. I reply back personally with an email that gives you a link directly to my private podcast feed. And if you're on a podcast player like Overcast or Breaker and you don't have the ability to leave a review, they have like a star or a heart button that you can press. It changes color after you press it. Take a screenshot, send it to me, and you'll get access to my private podcast feed. And these are just versions of Founders that I just save for reviewers, people that review. I've done 5 of them so far. So if you take a minute or two to do this right now, you'll immediately unlock 5 podcasts that I've done, and then I'm going to do about 1 a month moving forward. So, and that'll automatically update in your podcast player, just like anything else. And so for a minute or 2 of your time, you'll get literally, by the time we're done, hundreds of hours of work from me. And again, it's just a way for me to incentivize you, because leaving reviews and recommending them in these apps like Overcast and Breaker, Apple Podcasts, et cetera, is really, really, really helpful. And it's a way for me as an independent podcaster to kind of, level the playing field a little bit against, people that have a lot more resources. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I will be back next week. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for telling your friends. I will talk to you next week.